Now that I'm at this age, um, since I've been like in my, I don't know, 80s, I guess. I know since I've been in my 90s, and since people ask me to talk or be honored, my constant prayer is always, God, keep me grounded. But my mother was just so fair. Um, she, she she wasn't easy, you know. She didn't let us run over her. She didn't let us get away with too much. But she was fair when we did something wrong. She used to play baseball with us out in the backyard. She used to go sleigh riding with us over on Shady Rest on the golf course over there. Uh, this was when I was still in grammar school, I guess. Then later on, she was active in the community center. She was very good friends of Mrs. Groves. My mother was one of the ladies that used to go over there and help with the kids, and play with the kids and stuff like that. I know a lot about my father when I was younger. I used to get up in the morning with him. He used to work at Mack Motors, was in Plainfield then, and I used to get up with him and have coffee with him. Except it wasn't coffee. There was a product that's called Postum, Postum, and it tastes like coffee. It looks like coffee, but it's not. I think it was chicory or something like that. There were 11 of us all together. And all of us were practically 2 years or so apart. And I was next to the oldest. So that as I grew up, you know, my mother worked, so the older kids had to take care of the younger kids. In fact, when I first started talking to her, she was in junior high school in 7th grade, and she lived with her father and a couple of brothers. And after school, she went to a white person's house and did cleaning or helped her fix the dinner and wash dishes, such as, you know, things like that. So it was a while before we really got together. But I just didn't realize that she was as old as she was. And she was but she was so shy and I was so shy. It took us a long time to get together. There was nothing that I can remember was ever segregated in Scotch Plains. Westfield, yes. Plainfield, yes. But there wasn't that much in Scotch Plains because there were 2 streets here in Scotch Plains, down the Jerseyland area, where white people lived on. Actually, 3 streets. There's Morse Avenue right where St. John's is. There were houses across the street there. There was a street halfway up between, between where the Andrews store used to be and the top of the hill where the yard is now. Park Avenue was pretty much like it was. It didn't have quite as many stores or upscale stores, but they have a few more streets on 2nd Street, a few more stores on 2nd Street. When I was in high school, Scotch Plains had a college course, and then they had a general course, and they had a commercial course. So I had an idea that I was going to be a doctor. So I took the college course, okay. But once I got into high school, and this was around about 1929, 1930, during the Great Depression, and I knew then that I would not be able to go to college. I had planned to go to college and sort of work my way through, because I knew that was an option that you know, some people took. So I was just going to work. But then I decided that if I went to college, even working my way through, things were so bad economically that it would affect the money that my parents would have at home. So I said, well, I'll just forego that, and I'll just stay and work. I'll go to college after I get out, you know, after I get out of school, and after the war's over and all that. So I was at Shady Rest every time the doors opened for a dance. I was in there, I was on the golf course caddying every time there was somebody playing golf. I was chasing tennis balls when they had the nationals there. They had the nationals, the Black Nationals tennis tournament one year. And we had on our little white pants and shirt, just like the kids you see on television. But I was always over Shady Rest doing something. Dance, I just loved to dance, and that was the only place to go really, until we got older and we started going, you know, to New York, to places. I never did go to Newark much for things like that. It was easier to go to New York, because if I went to Newark, I'd have to catch the last bus at 12 something to come home. If I go to New York, we could stay till 2 o'clock, and then we come down and get the ferry and get the train back into Westfield and then walk home. See, sleigh riding on the hills. There was one little place where they had skating. Now I'm not sure what green, what part of the course that is now, but it used to be the tee off for the third hole. I remember when the bands used to come sometimes, we would be down there when the bus would come. Sometimes they'd have 2 buses for the band, and we'd be out there clamoring to carry some of their equipment, and just to be with them, to walk in the Shady Rest with them, you know. So that was a big thing. Count Basie's guys later on had a band that was sort of sponsored in the beginning by Count Basie, and they used to play all of his arrangements, but it was a whole big band, you know, 2 or 3 trumpets and trombones and 2 or 3 saxophones and all of that. Oh, wow. And they used to let us come in on Sunday afternoon sometimes. Even when there was no band there, they let us come in and dance to the jukebox. There was just a lot to do down there at Shady Rest. I was not interested in getting in the military, but by 1943, 44, the United States was crying for recruits. They were trying, they needed more bodies. So even with all the deferment you might have, you still had to go. I think there were 4 in there at one time. Harvey, Arthur, Manchu, James, all of them were in there at the same time. And I would have been in there too, but by the time World War II came along, I was already married and had a young'un. So I went to the Army because Uncle Sam said, I want you. Right after you were drafted in, they would give you tests, of different kinds of tests, to see what you might be best fitted for. And one of the tests that they gave you was the Morse code. I was sent to Godman Field, Kentucky, and that was just about the time I got into the Army, 1944. So I was assigned not to a fighter squadron, but to a bombardment squadron. And this was composed of B-25 bomber planes, which was a twin-engine bomber plane. And instead of having one pilot like the fighter planes, this had 5 guys on it. They had a pilot and co-pilot, and they had a navigator, they had an engineer, sometimes they had a tail gunner, sometimes a turret gunner, and they always had to have a radio man. So I was assigned to that 617th, and I was assigned to go to radio school. But they still were not known as Tuskegee Airmen. That didn't happen until 60-some years after the war. The reason they were called the Tuskegee Airmen is because initially they had, the first class had their training at Tuskegee Institute. Well, it was Tuskegee College at that time. And the reason they were training at Tuskegee is because at first they wouldn't let black men train to fly. The schools in the United States would not even enroll black guys to fly. Now there were some black pilots who had gone to Canada to flight school or to England, and there were women who had gone to those places to learn to fly. So there were a lot of black flyers around, and they used to give air shows. But the reason they were called Tuskegee Airmen is because when the Air Corps and the government finally decided to let black men fly, Tuskegee already had a flight program, and they had an airfield. So that's where the first class of 10 guys trained. Because at that time, everything in the Army, the Navy, everything, all the military was completely segregated. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't have black pilots training with white pilots. And even before that, when they sent me to radio school, now the radio school that I went to was Scottsfield, Illinois, and all the black trainees went to a separate school from the white trainees. Every day in class, you know, our classes were segregated, and it didn't happen until I guess it was late in '44 or maybe in the beginning of 1945. They decided that they were going to start integrating the classes. They were going to see if it would work out if they integrated the classes. And it just so happened that I was one of the 5 black cadets who trained with the white classes. You know, having just 5 guys, they just picked 5 guys to go to the class with about 20, 25 white guys. And, you know, we knew that we were just being tested. We knew this was an experiment, just like the pilots were experiment. So we studied hard. Most times when we got out of school during the day, we would go back to the barracks and we would go over the lesson plans. And we had one guy, he was from Baltimore. His name was Roscoe, and he wasn't quite as smart as the other guys, you know, the other 4 guys. So we just drilled him until he knew everything that the smart guys knew. And when we got back to class the next day, each day they were just surprised that we knew all the answers. But we knew we had to make good. The original Tuskegee pilots, and all of them that came behind them, had to go through the same thing. They were never integrated with the white pilots. So that the first class that graduated, they really had a hard time because they had all white officers, they had all white teachers, and some of them gave them a hard time. They washed them out of their training for any little thing. But the guys kept at it, and even though some of them washed out, white pilots washed out too. If you are a radio cadet and you graduate from radio school, and you're a gunnery person on a bomber, you have to graduate from there, and when you graduate from those 2 schools, you are given flight wings. And this was something special that the government wanted to do for the Tuskegee Airmen. Before that, there were very few people who knew that the black flyers who were in World War II and did such a terrific job, most people didn't know anything about Tuskegee Airmen. Living in New Jersey and living here in Scotch Plains, being close to New York, we didn't run into, once I got out of the Army, back in those days, we didn't run into much segregation. We knew the places that did not want to serve black people. And at the time, they were just, I was just not involved in places where that kind of thing was going on. Now there were a couple of incidents. There was a bowling alley in Westfield that black people couldn't go to. There was a drugstore that had a soda fountain that wouldn't serve black people. There's a tea room in Westfield that wouldn't serve black people. There was a tea room in Plainfield, Clara Louise Tea Room.
Wow.
I never went there, but that was one of the places. Initially, there was a soda fountain that black people wouldn't be served. The YMCA was segregated. Now this is a Young Men's Christian Association, but there was in Plainfield a separate black YMCA. Now, I'm not sure if this was something that had to be, or whether black people just decided to have their own YMCA in their area. But I know there was a separate black YMCA. For a while down in Florence, South Carolina, I guess. And one time I was going to come home, and I had to go to Charlotte to get the plane. And I and a couple of more guys went to a little, it actually was in the bus station. And they had a little place for snacks and hot dogs and stuff like that. And we knew they wouldn't serve black people, okay? We knew that we had to go around the back, and that's where they served black people. But when we got around there, to be served, there was a window, and then below the window was another little window, and then an opening for the food. So what you had to do, you couldn't talk through the main window. You had to go to this little window, and you had to bend down and tell the guy what you want. And then when he gave it to you, you had to bend even lower to get it. So we just didn't buy anything. The other thing that happened to me, it was kind of funny, but it was serious. I was coming home from, this was when I was in Garden Field, and of course the railroads, not the railroads, the buses were segregated. And if you got on a bus, you had to go to the back. So everybody knew that. Now I was coming home, I was in my uniform, and I went to the back, and I was standing because all the seats were taken. And after a couple of stops, a guy got up about the middle of the bus. A guy got up, white guy got up and got off the bus. So all the white people were seated by then, okay? So I go marching up to this empty seat, and there was a white guy sitting there, and I looked at him, I said, "You mind if I sit here?" He said, "No, I don't care," you know, sort of like that. So I sat down. Now as soon as I sat down, the bus driver, I could see the mirror. He couldn't drive, he couldn't look at the street for looking in the mirror at me. So we went for like, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes or so. He stopped the bus and he says, "I gotta come back and straightened out this seating arrangement, you know, some words like that. He came out, he took a person from near the back, a white person from near the back, where there was nobody sitting. He told me, you have to go sit in the back. I knew that black people got killed for little or nothing.
Yeah.
So if I could avoid it, I would avoid it. So that's why I just went on in the back like he said. I remember one thing back in the second grade. Teacher slapped me. Her name was Mrs. Kleinhans. And never had a problem or anything. And so, you know, my mother was down there in the next few minutes. And she apologized and all that. She said she just went off. She just didn't realize. And my mother was, you know, was telling her she didn't really know why she would slap me, because I was one of the good students. I don't feel that I'm special. I really don't. But if I can do, let me do it. I knew that I was as smart as anybody else. I knew that I could dance as well as any of the other guys. But I didn't want to come off as showing that I was smarter or showing that I could do something better. I was always sort of content to let somebody else be the star. When I was in school, I knew I was just as smart, just as good. My mother used to beat it into us that you're just as good as anybody else and you could be as smart as anybody else. But I didn't want to come off that way, except when I was around when I was around white folks. I wanted to come off as being just as smart as you. I could talk as intelligently as you can. I can do anything that you can do. I have a friend upstairs.